I was born in a small community 36 miles west of Chicago and lived there through kindergarten. Few people know about a brief interlude in my life when I became a Jersey boy. In the summer of 1959, my father was transferred to AT&T's headquarters in Manhattan for a 2-year gig. Even back then, nobody could afford to live in Manhattan, and my folks weren't enthralled with any of the New York boroughs either. So my dad found a home we could rent in the quiet New Jersey suburb of Westfield. So in the summer of '59, we loaded up the 1953 Ford station wagon and drove across the country to the East Coast. I didn't mind the trip so much. Back in those days, we didn't have to wear seatbelts. In fact, I'm pretty sure that the old Ford didn't even have seatbelts. So I was pretty much free to move around. There were plenty of windows in the car, so I had terrific views the whole time. Best of all, I had the far back seat. My sister and I called it the way back seat, all to myself, unless I chose to climb into the regular back seat to torment my older sister. I was only 5 years old when we left Illinois and hadn't seen much of the world. Upon our arrival in New Jersey, however, I could sense that some things were different. People spoke differently. Towns were closer together. The grocery stores had different names. And yet, it really didn't look all that different from where I'd been living. Still, I knew we were a long way from home. We'd only been in town a couple of days. I was out in the front yard with my mom. Our garage was still packed with boxes from our move, so our car was parked in front of the house. A woman and her young daughter were walking past our house when the daughter saw the license plates on our Ford and asked her mother, "Illinois? Where's that?" The mother's reply was classic East Coast. "Oh, that's way out west somewhere, near Chicago." We were obviously strangers in a strange land. I didn't realize until many years later just how strange it was. Someone named Charles Adams had been born there, and as a child had roamed the streets of Westfield, fascinated by the architecture of some of the old homes in town. He also spent a lot of time at the Presbyterian Cemetery, equally fascinated by the look and feel of the place. Nobody in town talked about him, unless they were subscribers to the New Yorker, for whom he drew cartoons with dark and ghoulish humor from 1937 until his death. There was a house in town that is reported to be one of the inspirations for the home in which his creepy characters lived. The television series inspired by his cartoons, he later gave names to all the characters, which were used in the show, didn't broadcast until 1964. By that time, we had moved back to our home in Illinois. Not all the strangeness was dark or macabre. Some of it was just different. One day, my dad came home from work with tickets to a baseball game. The next day, he took me to Yankee Stadium to see the Yankees play the Chicago White Sox. Growing up, everybody I knew watched the Cubs, except my best buddy Billy Meade, who for some reason beyond my comprehension was a devout White Sox fan. People in New Jersey seemed to have no idea who the Cubs were. I, in return, didn't have a clue who the Yankees were. My dad informed me that they were the team for baseball fans in New York and New Jersey. The Dodgers had already left Brooklyn for Los Angeles years ago, and the Mets had yet to make their miserable debut. Local fans raved about the Yankees, who apparently were a powerhouse. Again, a rather strange concept to a kid who was a Cubs fan. They also had a couple of sluggers on the team by the names of Mantle and Maris that the locals were excited about. And my dad told me they had a fantastic catcher. My dad had been a catcher when he played ball, by the name of Yogi Berra. Our seats were right behind home plate in the stadium that Ruth built. It gave us a pretty good view of the batters and the catcher. I was kind of excited, and then a bit disappointed when I saw the Yankees catcher. I had been all excited to see Yogi Berra playing baseball, but the guy who stood behind the plate, or crouched behind the plate, was actually named Yogi Berra. In addition to being a phenomenal catcher, he was apparently known for his witty sayings, but I never heard him say anything interesting, at least not from where I was sitting. Not everything about New Jersey was strange or uncomfortable. The town we lived in was a nice, small town, much like the one we had lived in while in Illinois. We even had nice, friendly neighbors, even though they were a bit challenged when it came to geography and baseball. The very nice neighbors across the street had a son named Dusty, who was also a bit different than anyone I had ever met. In those days, few people used the phrase Down syndrome when talking about someone like Dusty. The term they used has mercifully been replaced. There was no question, however, that Dusty looked, spoke, and acted a little differently than the rest of us. It was a bit puzzling to us as kids because he was big enough to be an adult, but he seemed more like the rest of us kids in some way. The thing of it was that all the kids in the neighborhood loved Dusty. It was almost as if he were a celebrity. When there were neighborhood get-togethers, all the kids wanted to be at the same table with him. It wasn't morbid curiosity. We all genuinely liked him and were attracted to him somehow. At the same time, we knew that there was something special and different about him. We sensed somehow that he was very vulnerable, and we felt protective of him. We would go to high school football games, and everyone took turns accompanying Dusty to the concession stand. His parents would say something like, "Dusty, why don't you take Mike and walk him over to where the popcorn is?" He would then take me by the hand and walk me to the stand, making sure I didn't get lost. He would do that with several kids. Every one of us knew that Dusty was protecting us. At the same time, it was crystal clear to us that he was our responsibility. We were to make sure that nobody insulted or mistreated him. 65 years later, I still remember Dusty fondly. My family would occasionally take trips into New York City in much the same way we'd drive into Chicago when we lived in Illinois. But unlike Chicago, where we had relatives, we didn't know anybody in New York. Still, I was exposed to Broadway shows, ferries, and super tall buildings they called skyscrapers. I'll never forget the time my dad let my mom and my aunt go to the top of the Chrysler building when they thought they were going to the top of the Empire State Building. I'm not sure my mom or my aunt ever quite forgave my dad for that. We did, however, later make it to the top of the Empire State Building. Even though I was a very young boy, I would catch snatches of the news on TV. One story in particular caught my attention. There had been a series of murders in the city, and the police had nabbed the presumed culprits. They had colorful names that intrigued me. The one that struck me and stayed with me was someone they called the Umbrella Man. I wondered if he actually killed people with his umbrella. It wasn't until many years later that the story came back into focus. Paul Simone had written a musical about a trial in New York. He focused on the other suspect, someone known as the Cape Man. When I heard Simone's song, Adios Hermanos, I heard the lyric, "Well, they shackled my hands, a heavy belt around my waist to restrain me, and they shackled my legs. Hernandez, the Umbrella Man, chained beside me." It all came rushing back to me. In my mind, I was a 6-year-old kid standing in the backyard of our house in New Jersey, wondering about the Umbrella Man. We left New Jersey in the summer of 1961 in our brand new 1960 Chevy Biscayne, a few months before Roger Maris hit 61 home runs to break Babe Ruth's record. To be honest, it didn't matter that much to me. He might have broken the record, but he was no Ernie Banks. And that was the end of my time as a Jersey boy.